Hey everybody, it's Mark Bayer. It's great to be here with you as we start to talk about this really important issue of science communication and how to get your story out and how to really make your points known and how to explain the work that you're doing in a way that's really compelling, that's engaging, that people can understand. I obviously am standing up and I might move around a little bit. I hope that's okay. I'm not used to, I don't like to lecture. I like to make things very much interactive. So you might see me moving around a little bit. And I hope that's okay. That's just usually I don't like to stand at a podium when I'm out there, when I'm speaking to groups. So I'm not standing behind a podium today. But it is great to be here. I want to really first thank everyone in the group who responded to questions about what the challenges are. I also really want to thank Sigal for just taking a look at the comments. I might pause a little bit. I want to thank Sigal for putting this whole thing together and for reaching out to me. I'm really passionate about science communication and science policy, and I'll tell you a little bit about why that is. And then we're going to turn to the presentation. We've got a lot of things to talk about. I have some questions for you. I want some input from you. I got a lot of good input. You're going to see that as well as we go through this. So the first thing I'm going to do is just say, can everybody hear me? Because obviously I want to make sure that we're all connected here. And so if you would just let me know that would be really helpful. And the other thing I'm curious about is where you are. Yes. All right. Great. Tell me, where are you connecting from? Where in the world are you? I am outside of Washington, D.C. in Arlington, Virginia, and I sort of just give you a little bit of background about me, and then we're going to go off to the races while people are still joining. Good. It looks like everyone can see me. Hey, it's great to be here with you. I'm fired up, and I'm glad that we've got a good group who are starting to join. But I'll just tell you a little bit of background about me as people are starting to connect here. So what I do now is I help scientists effectively communicate their work to their most important stakeholders. So that could be policymakers, it could be their family, it could be a potential investor, it could be a potential employer. What we're seeing, we've got California, and some others here. I'll just see as people start to trickle in. And that can be a challenging enterprise, to take something, as you're focused on your work, and it's complex, a lot of different dimensions to it. You're right down in the weeds. We get some more California. Thank you for being here. And how do you decide what to emphasize? How do you decide sort of if you think about it, what gets left on the cutting room floor, so to speak, as you're creating, say, your story. And we're going to talk about that. I know there was a really good comment in the Facebook group over the last week about it's really hard to tell a story about the work that I do. And I love that comment because it right away recognizes the importance of telling stories, of creating a narrative about your work. And that's a big part of people understanding your work and your research, your projects you do in your lab, because humans respond to storytelling, and that's because we are neurologically hardwired to do that since the beginning. And by telling constructing this story and this narrative, and providing that to the listener, you're helping him or her really understand and think along with you a bit more. You're putting it in terms that the listener can understand and not get hung up with all the details, which was another comment that people had. Sort of, sometimes they get lost in the weeds, and it's hard to come up with very specific sort of like short declarative sentences about a very complicated topic, and I completely understand that. So just these are things that we're going to focus on during our time together. And I'll just tell you, kind of getting back to like who I am, what I do. So my focus is helping scientists really convey their information in a way that's engaging, that's compelling, that's accessible, to non-experts. And the reasoning, behind that, of course, part of it is funding. If you can't explain what you're doing in a way that's effective, then it's going to be pretty hard to get funding for your research. The other part of that would be, just a quick story about that was I teach an online course, and one of my students recently announced that she got this 3-year grant, which was fantastic. She had finished the course back in April, had a busy summer, and then she got a grant. And so she mentioned in her post that she had used, as part of the lay abstract for the grant, she had used some of the communication tips that she learned in the course, and felt like it really helped her win the grant. And that is a big part of why I do what I do, because I want your voices to be heard in places that are really important for all of us, and that means the Congress. That means anyone who's in a position to direct policy. It doesn't have to be the U.S. Congress; it could be the Knesset. It could be anywhere. People who are in a position to develop and implement policy should be doing that based on facts and evidence and the latest research and what we're finding. So that's a big part of why I do what I do. Kind of stepping back, what I did before was I worked on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. for about 20 years. I was a chief of staff in the U.S. Senate. I was a chief of staff in the U.S. House of Representatives. And over the course of those 20 years, I really developed, I had to, by necessity, the ability to distill complicated policy issues. So we might be in short order, and then make them engaging, and then present them to journalists at CNN, MSNBC, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, AP. You get the picture. So how do you take something like the triple play nuclear reactor that produced tritium and had plutonium, also was generating plutonium, and then also other materials. How do you take something like that and explain it, to a reporter on deadline for the Wall Street Journal? Oh, and by the way, you have 3 hours because the boss is going to do an interview with the Wall Street Journal on this subject, and you need to provide the talking points. So these are things that I used to do, all the time. Go into, the green room, right outside the studio of downtown DC at CNN, or I think I was at CNBC, and then really have had have gone through the topic, developed it, kind of stripped away things that were not necessary for a very tight segment, and then come up with an interesting, memorable way to present it. That was sort of my life for quite a while. And what I want to do now is I want to teach you how to do that with your work, with your research. And I because, for the reasons that I sort of said, I think it's really important that your voices are heard. And also, talking to just if you decided you wanted to take the entrepreneurship route, and you were developing, you had a product or service, well, you need to get investors excited about it. And maybe it's the next, great way to treat Parkinson's disease, or, Alzheimer's, or, high blood pressure, or whatever psoriasis. I mean, who knows what it could be? And if you're not able to explain that in a way that's compelling and understood by someone who's in a position to fund you, then your idea, your work is not going to move forward the way it should. And I view that as, as something bad for society generally. And I want to help people who are innovators like you, who are devoting your life to coming up with cures, to present their information in a way that can really move other people who are in a position to advance and accelerate what they're doing. I just say really briefly, one quick story. When I met Ofer, and I was up in Boston at Harvard Business School and participated in the 8400, I think it might be. Tell me if I'm wrong on that. But I think it's the organization in Israel that's trying to build a healthcare ecosystem, and Science Abroad was there. And I was seated at a table with an Israeli scientist who told an incredible story about how she came up with the cure. He had this idea, this epiphany, came up with a cure that previously affects a very small number of children every year, but it's debilitating and it's ultimately fatal. And she figured out how to do that, how to, in an ingenious way, how to come up with that cure. And it was so inspiring. And I was just thinking, her ability to tell that story in such a way, I mean, you couldn't help but be moved. So if you're a policymaker or a funder, otherwise a funder or someone, an investor potentially, hearing her present it that way, you would want to help. You would want to advance, her cause. And it's those sorts of techniques that I want to talk about today. So let's get started. Let's get into it. Now, I was going to initially share my screen with you, but then I thought that might be a little distracting to go back and forth. So I'm just going to glance here at just a short outline that I have. And I guess the first thing I want to say is, I hear you. I hear the comments that you made in the Facebook group, about the challenges. I mean, those are all things that I hear a lot from scientists, whether they're natural scientists, whether they're social scientists, regardless of their background. And so that's, in a way, that's sort of good, because I've developed the methodology and which is still, iterative. We're still working on it, but a way to sort of approach these challenges so that your voices can be heard clearly by the people who really can help move your work forward. So one of the first questions, that sort of, came out of what we were talking about, and something that I always emphasize, and I call it, the big question. All right. So in your mind, before you have a conversation with one person or an audience of people who don't come from your specialty, for example, the big question, which is, why should they care? Why should I care about what you're doing? And that is kind of the framework for your approach generally when you want to communicate in a way that's gonna be powerful. Now, so you have to have that kind of in your mind. Why should I care? Why should I care about what you're talking about? Well, that kind of also as part of that, you kind of think about, well, what is my background? There are things about me that might help you, with the answer to that question. Maybe if we're talking, let's just say we're talking about, we'll go back to we'll talk about kidney disease, and so you're working on something. I understand we're going to get to the basic research and those types of questions. I have all your questions that you had, and we'll get to those in a minute. We'll start going through them, but I want to give you the kind of like the overarching thing here, which is, whenever you approach a conversation with someone else about your work, always be thinking about beforehand why they should care about what you do. And you ask yourself that, and then say, oh, well, say I'm working on cancer research or kidney disease. Is there something about the audience that, should particularly care about that, that condition? Up at Cornell University, which is where I guest lecture at sometimes. Actually, I'm going to go up there again in a few months. There is a group that provides that provides various services for people who are afflicted with cancer, and that group has a lot of patients. People who have various types of cancer, and they meet with researchers at Cornell who are working on cancer fighting technologies or treatments or therapies. And so, it's very clear in that example why that audience, the audience up at Cornell, it's the Finger Lakes, I think it's called the Finger Lakes Cancer Resource Center. These are people who are dealing with cancer in a very personal way themselves or someone in their family. And they're meeting with researchers at Cornell who are working on those topics. So when they have those conversations, it's very clear why the audience should care. So it's not always that clear cut when you're having a conversation, say, why this, so as part of that, what I would say is, ask questions, which is sort of the second part of this. So why should they care about your topic? Well, hey, does anyone have a family member who has a kidney disease? Or has anyone had any kind of experience with kidney stones or whatever the condition, whatever the condition happens to be, renal failure, whatever it is, asking questions is a great way to surface answers to the why should they care, the way of thinking or framework. And if you can do research in advance, this is something that I talk about a lot. And I know we're cramming a lot of things here in this Facebook Live. I teach a whole 4-part course on the whole thing, and I apologize if what I'm giving you is just kind of quick here and there points. But my overall thing I want you to think about is a big part of effectively communicating your science, to start with, the highest level, is why should your audience care about your science? And if you can do some research in advance, which could be as easy as going to the Facebook group of the organization or looking on LinkedIn of the person that you're going to be talking to, or following them on Twitter, going to if they have a YouTube channel, any press releases, like what are they talking about that could relate to your audience? It could relate to your topic, because that is going to help start this connection when you kind of reference things that they experience. And then that locks sort of the attention, can help lock attention into your talk. Okay, so that's the first question, sort of why should they care? Now, the big answer, sometimes I call it, is what are the results that your work may produce or is aimed to produce, or what the sort of goal is of your research. Now, I know there were questions, and they were really good questions about, well, I'm doing basic research, and it's hard for me to explain exactly what I'm doing, particularly, opposed to the, compared to, say, my lab, because it's basic research. It's not like directly connected to something that, commercial, or that is maybe more experience in somebody's day-to-day life. Well, that's okay. That is fine, because what I teach is sort of like they're getting into the why. Like, well, why am I working on this particular area? There's got to be some kind of link between the why, what you're doing, and then the overall goal that is that you're aiming to achieve. And I think in the Facebook comments before this, in the group, I said sort of like the forest and the trees. Maybe you're just working to plant that one tree, right? And the goal is, though, this big forest, ultimately. And it's funny. So I would just say you can talk about why this forest is necessary, right? What it's going to do, what it's going to provide first, right? To just orient the listener, because the listener wants to hear something that he or she can understand. And well, our goal here, is to cure this rare genetic disorder, and here's why that's bad, And so what I'm doing is I'm working on this individual piece. I'm planting this tree so that we're hoping that it's going to grow. Others will kind of grow with it, grow alongside of it, and we'll develop. Ultimately, our hope is we create this cure, this therapy for, say, this rare genetic disease. So what I'm trying to get you to think about is the why. Why you're doing this particular task or series of experiments, and it's tied to something larger, a larger goal, right? But this is again sort of, I say, start at the finish line. Start at the higher level where people are much more likely to have some sort of connection to what you are saying, understand it, have experienced it, or a family member. Tell me if that makes sense in the chat. Does that kind of thinking make sense as far as how you can link something that is, really focused, which is really basic research, to something larger in a way that can resonate with your listener? Tell me if you think that makes sense. Can you see yourself kind of doing that? You're starting at the finish line, what our goal is, and then you're kind of working backwards. And I'm going to tell you in a minute why that's important. So let me know in the chat if that kind of technique makes sense, or click on this is like, click on a thumbs up or whatever the icon is that you have that shows that, yeah, this is something that makes sense, because I really wanted to address it. Thank you. A number of people talked about that in the Facebook group. And so here's the thinking behind this by starting at the finish line. Okay. I talked about this notion of, well, you're starting at a higher level because that's where the people are going to have some sort of connection, understanding, experience with what you're talking about. In addition to that, there's something that you may have heard of before, but I love to talk to reference this. My neuroscience friends have taught me, it's primacy and recency. So primacy, the first thing that you hear me say, that's where you're most fixed. Your attention is most fixed on the first thing that I say. And then things happen. And then the recency part is the last thing that I say. So it's the thing that's most recent to you hearing, because it's at the end, right? And so people tend to remember the first thing and they remember the last thing. And so a lot of times so it's really important that you hook them immediately with something that they get, that they understand, because that's what they're going to remember. And then you can work backwards and you can talk about how your basic research is connected to this. And then at the end, you want to loop back to the beginning and kind of restate. And so we're doing all these things, and I'm at the lab and tell a story. We're there, 7 days a week. We're working 14-hour days. This is part of how you can tell your story in a way that's compelling, that people can like, oh, I can picture them working away, at their lab. We're doing all that because our goal is, and then you restate, you're really kind of revisiting the first thing that you said. It's primacy and recency. You want to first start with something that's kind of a wow, kind of like a connection. All right, I'm locked in now. I understand what you're saying. And then you can work back to a little bit, about your research and how it fits in, and then come back at the end to talk about, all right, and this is why we're doing all this stuff, because we want to cure this particular, we're looking for a cure to Crohn's disease, or we're trying to figure out advancement on hemophilia, something that we can do there. So this primacy and recency is an idea that I want you to keep in mind as well. Now, the other thing that we're going to start to get into some of these tools now, really. So these are specific tools that you can use when explaining your research. And it also goes to the point that somebody made about, which I appreciated in the Facebook group, there's so many details and sentences can get really long, and then you kind of get tangled. That was the verb. Up, and you lose the attention of the audience. It was a great comment. If that person's listening, can they click on a thumbs up or one of those buttons that they have there just to let me know? It's relevant for everybody, I think, because it can be a challenge. And so what I want to do is give you, we call rhetorical devices. These are basically just ways of framing and expressing your research in a way that people will understand by using these particular tools. And so I have this presentation is going to be available. But I have, and I'm happy to send a list of this. What I can do is actually I'll post in the group what these tools are, and I'm going to give you some examples. Okay, but the one thing that I want you to remember right now, when you're thinking about your research and explaining it, is what is this like? What is what we're doing sort of like? You know, by that I mean, what is a comparison that I can use to explain it? When we were talking about, I was talking about basic research and then tying that back, I used a metaphor, right? I said it's like a tree, single tree, and then you're working on it you're planting your tree so that you can create this forest that's going to solve a problem, right? And so most people are familiar with trees and they know what they're talking, and when you start to use a reference like that, the person starts to think along with you. I like to call it a micro story. Getting to the point of, well, it can be hard to create a large story, a narrative sometimes. It can, but metaphors and similes, which are basically, simile, you're just saying it's like this, or this work is like building a car, or this is like refueling the airplane while it's in flight, right? I mean, things that you get, you hear these things all the time, like or as, that's your simile. And then your metaphor is just kind of a comparison that would be sort of like, it's planting a tree so that a forest can grow, or, something like that. It's a comparison without using like or as. But I always want you to think about, what is what I'm doing like something that your audience has experienced, right? And that kind of thinking creates this connection and familiarity with your audience, because you're explaining what you do in something that they've experienced or at least understand and that they can picture in their mind. And it doesn't have to be it's I know when working with scientists, sometimes there's hang-ups. I want to be accurate. Of course, I need to preserve the accuracy. No doubt about that. When you're creating this picture in someone's mind, the idea is it's a way to connect. It's a way of explaining. Obviously, you're using it because it reflects what you do. I just don't want you to get too hung up on every little detail about what you do. Oh, that doesn't really fit the metaphor because this little thing is different. It's kind of just one way of setting the stage so that you're connecting with your audience can understand, what you're talking about at a relatively high level. So think about, okay, first of all, the question is, why should they care about what I'm talking about? And then we talked about some of the ways of figuring that out beforehand. One of which during the conversation is asking questions. You can lead off your conversation by asking questions. And it's a good way to get this engagement going back and forth, get people sort of awake and away from their phones, and whoa, she's calling on people. I better pay attention. But also, it's a good way for you to get information from the audience about their personal experience, their personal frame of reference, which you can, incorporate or stitch into your talk. So why should they care? How do I figure that out? We talked a little bit about that. And then even presenting, like, okay, well, now I'm going to present, but I'm going to think about this primacy and recency issue. I want to kind of hit them with something that they're going to understand immediately. And then I'm going to loop back at the end to kind of restate that, because they're going to remember that. And now we're talking about the tools from that to kind of present that. And I know this is quick, but the tool, and I'm gonna, like I said, I'll post this in the Facebook group. So the number one thing is always trying to figure out, what is this like? What is what I am doing right now similar to something in the real world, so to speak, that my audience understands? Yeah, if you can get that, thank you. If you can get that, that's gonna really help you. And I want to just tell you, these things take practice. I want you to be, I don't want you to get frustrated, because it does take practice to really to kind of get comfortable doing this more quickly. And so it's like kind of experimentation, and you guys run experiments and they don't always work out. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And so you can try some of these things out on your family members, your little brother, your second cousin, Thanksgiving is coming or whenever, the holidays, and say like, hey, so what are you working on? What are you doing these days, right? Well, this is what I'm doing. But maybe think about, if you're going to spend time with family over the holidays, that maybe that's a good time, in just about a month's time, to just try out some of these explanations, like some of these tools that we're talking about. It's one of my students, actually, what was a podcast guest of mine. She said her parents never knew. She got her postdoc. Parents never knew what she did. Right? People would ask, so how's your daughter? What's she doing? Well, she's still in school. That's what they would say, because they didn't understand what she did, because she couldn't explain it to them. It wasn't until she did her lay abstract for her thesis that she really, and this was a woman whose mother was an English professor who grew up reading the classics and reading for fun, but that had been shelved when she went into science like full force, and so she hadn't done that kind of thing in a long time. Her lay abstract was really well written and really accessible, and it ended up getting printed in the newspaper in Puerto Rico, which is where her parents lived and where she grew up, and it became this big thing where it was a very popular piece. People were excited about it, and her parents could finally say like exactly what she did, because they could understand it. So maybe during Thanksgiving, think about that. I'm going to try out use some of these metaphors, and you know what? They might sometimes they may work, they may not. They sort of work. And you say, how about if I explain it this way? How about if I use this comparison? Or what would make it easier? I think you want to run, I guess, sort of as I'm thinking about, let's run some experiments over Thanksgiving on explaining your work, and use metaphors. Here's some of the other things, and I'm gonna, like I said, you'll see this before. Right after this, I'll post it. Some pop culture references. Sometimes in movies, there are characters in movies. I'll tell you, one of my people who gives me a lot of inspiration is a scientist. Just got a tenure track position at Carnegie Mellon. Her name is Elizabeth Wayne, and she was a postdoc at NC, North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and I had a chance to meet her, and I talked to her. I interviewed her for the podcast, and we talked about, so she has this TED Talk. She's a TED fellow. She's an NCI fellow. In her TED Talk, she talks about how sort of using the immune system, like hitching a ride on immune cells to do X, Y, and Z, and it's so engaging. The immune cells, they know where the fire is, right? They know where the tumor is. They're heading in that direction. So maybe we can hitch a ride. Maybe we can create it so that the medicine, for the tumor, not just going to the body wherever, but it's actually going in the same lane on the same train, on the same track, as the immune cells, so we know it's going to go to the right place. Well, I showed my 13-year-old that, and he was fascinated by it, because he got it immediately. So think about, what am I doing in my work, whether it's basic research or something, or not, or applied, and ask yourself, what is it like, and then kind of try some metaphors out on family it can be over the holidays and weekend, whatever. And see what they say. And did that make sense to you? No. How about if I explain it this way? Or what would help, in this description? Because I'm working on science communication, and I want to make sure, this is really helpful for me. I want to run an experiment, and so let me know. And like I said, don't get frustrated. And I tell scientists I work with all the time, I'm so inspired by the work that you do, and I want it out there. I want people to, the broader world, to get it and to have it make a difference. And so it's only going to do that if the broader world can understand what you're talking about, obviously, as you know. And so one thing about scientists I say is, you're comfortable, you can run experiments all the time, sometimes they don't work out, but you're really persistent, right? And that's kind of the thinking that I'd like you to apply when you're trying to figure out the best way to communicate your science. Don't get frustrated. It doesn't happen immediately. You're going to try, and you're going to get feedback, and you're going to adjust, And it's sort of like being in a, being in a lab. Maybe, you're gonna then, as a result, you're gonna iterate. You're gonna make some adjustments. Same thing about communicating. And then what's going to happen is the more you do this communication to broad audiences, the better you're going to get at it. And then the better you get at it, the more you're going to like doing it, which means you're going to look for opportunities or take opportunities as more opportunities that come along to do it, and then start doing it more and more and get better and better. And it's just a nice virtuous cycle. So I'm excited for you to try that. I'd love for people to post, their experiences in the Facebook group of how they're, explaining their science. So, okay, so we talked about what it's like. Now I'm going to give you, let's see, we've got about half an hour. I'm going to give you a quick, a quick sort of, it's a, what is it, 5-part, sort of like a 5-part model, if you will, to start with, right? Just to have something to think about. And I'm going to actually type just so that this is what I'm talking about. And it is, there we go. Okay, cool. Oh, I see. Maybe if I had scrolled up, I would have seen. We got New York City. I'm heading to New York City in a couple of weeks. Cool. All right, cool. Toronto, love Toronto, California, Sweden, very nice. Thank you. I'm not sure what the time difference is. Actually, what time is it in Sweden right now? I'd like to know. I'd like to know that. So, told you. This is kind of an acronym that I came up with based on kind of an approach to understanding, to presenting your science in a way that that's accessible. And the first thing is, thank you for sticking with me. And so what I use, so this is an acronym, like I said. So the first thing, the T, the very first thing you're going to do, and you're going to tie what you're talking about to something specific about the audience, meaning like something that they understand, they've experienced, that they just relate to, right? And like I said, the way to do that is there are a number of ways. Research in advance through Facebook, LinkedIn, websites, who are these people that I'm be talking to? What do they care about? Actually, one other thing that I do all the time is I'm going to talk to a group. Well, I've never talked to environmental engineers in New Zealand until a couple weeks ago when I went over there and did a keynote speech. So what did I do? Well, a few weeks before the conference, I spoke to the head of the group, the woman who is the head at this conference, and I asked her a number of questions, and then I actually, a little before, I sent her my presentation, and I just said, can we just do a quick call? I want to go over this to make sure that everything that I'm including, would really resonate, be relatable to the audience. And so that way, the answer to the exam, the answers to the exam before you go in and sit for the test, because you've already kind of test marketed what you're going to say with a member of the leader of the audience. You've already looked at social media. You've already looked at, how they refer to something or other, or what's a big thing that they're concerned about that you see there are a lot of posts in their Facebook group about. Okay. Now, that's not always possible, and sometimes you need to ask a lot of, a series of questions at the beginning, to engage and find out information about the, people in the audience. But those are two just quick techniques that you to think about. So the first thing, told you. The T is you're tying whatever you're going to talk about to your audience's experience. So members of your audience's experience, so that they can relate to it, connect to it, and feel like they understand it. So that's the T. Now the O. So the O, is a one sentence. This is your sort of elevator speech idea, right? A one sentence description that starts at, which is only focused on the result that you hope to achieve, or with the research, and you're really, and answers the question of like, why should you care about this? why should you as an audience member care about this? Okay, you need, because this gets back to this primacy and recency, right? The first thing that I'm going to say is something that you relate to, right? You understand. You want to talk about the forest. You don't want to talk about the poplar tree that you planted. All right, because some people even don't. What is what does it even look like? I don't. But I know what a forest looks like. So when I even say these words, what I want you to do is the first things that come out of your mouth, I want the audience to be thinking, to visualize what you're talking about, because they understand it. It's something that they see in their everyday life or they're familiar with, right? So that's why you need to start at the end. Does that make sense? The told you. Okay, so we tie it to the audience's interest. And then the O, is you're going to, your first sentence, a one sentence, a very tightly crafted sentence, but that's structured so that the result, the goal, the aim is first. Answering this question, why should this audience member care? Why should the audience care about what you're doing? Okay, that's yo. Now, the L is our like comparison, right? And so that, what I just told you, which is your science, your project, starting at the high level and then working back a little bit, that what I do is sort of like when you go to the grocery store and all the, everything in the shelves is kind of all mixed up and the cells are, they're not producing the way that they're kind of going haywire. Or the shelves are all the products in the shelves are all over the place. They're not in the correct order. That's kind of like what happens with this genetic disease that we're working on. It's like the cells have created this total jumble, and as a result, there are these terrible diseases that happen. Okay, so that's your like. So you've tied it, made it relevant. Then you go with your one sentence leading with a result. And then the L is it's like, right? It's like something. So it's like something that I understand. Okay, TOLD. And then the D is, if this is possible, if there's some real world application, it kind of flows from it sort of like, but if there's something else in the real world that you can, continue to sort of like a real world description of what it is that you're working on, that's helpful, the D. And then the U is you want to underscore for the listener. Again, this is getting back to the why should they care, which is the beginning, right? So the most recent thing is we're doing all these things. I'm working in the lab. My colleagues, PI, everybody, this project was funded so that we can blank, so that we can do something that the audience is going to understand, right? And so just using those words, so that it's making it relevant. It's also kind of explaining, okay, well, here's the whole, here's the whole importance of, here's why we're spending all this time doing it, tied to something in the real world. So the told you model. Now, does anyone, any questions on that? On either, actually, let's pause here for a minute, and I want to just I want to take questions from you in the last sort of 15 minutes that we have. And I know this was kind of a race, and thank you for sticking with me through the Facebook hiccup. But I want questions from you. And one thing is you're sort of thinking about stuff, you can tag me if you have questions that occur, if you're going to be giving a talk and you want some feedback, just tag me in the Facebook group and I'd be very happy to respond. And just tag me right in the Facebook group, and then I can go right there and answer your questions as well. So whatever's easier. Okay, well, while you're thinking about that, there's one other thing I just want to mention while you're thinking. If this is something interesting, we just did basically a sprint through what I teach in a 4-part webinar, an hour at a time over 4 weeks 1-hour sessions. And we do have a practice where I have students videotape themselves about their research in 60-second blocks, and then we workshop it, and then I provide feedback either privately or with the group, and then students go back and they do it again, and this time incorporating the feedback that they got, and they can really see that delta and how much they've improved just on one round. So if I work with natural and social scientists as part of this course, which is called How to Effectively Communicate Your Science to Any Audience. And oftentimes it's the university, well, actually it has been every time, the university that funds the students in my, for my course. So it's the university that is paying for the course, and then they send a certain number of PhDs or postdocs to the course. So if you're interested in learning more information about my course, which goes much deeper than we can here and further, and has interaction, has the video and the kind of workshopping part, just type in the chat course, and then I will send you a one-pager, that relates, that describes the course. I'm going to offer it again in January of 2020. I offered it. So before we had this, before the connection petered out for some reason, there was a question that I saw about any particular tips. It's really, the more complicated the topic is, this question about, I think it was related to computational physics, is you want to try to apply the same kind of model. Like, first of all, why are you working on this? Why should the person care? Why should your audience care about what you're doing? Let me look at some of this, see if this was the. So I want to get to Nir's question in a second, or Nir's comment. So on the computational physics question, so again, starting at the finish line, why should they care? Why is it at all relevant? And I was listening to NPR last night, and they had this great, their Hidden Brain series, and they were talking about like data science in such a way, it was so fascinating, and they were relating it to the way a U.S. spy was caught, the way it's done, how things in Las Vegas, how the casinos use it. I mean, they were showing some kind of result, right? They didn't get into all of the backstory about how this happens, but they really were beginning at the end, start at the finish line. So I would basically apply a lot of the same things we've been talking about to whether it's computational physics or or renal failure. All right. So basic. So when it comes to basic science, mention disease. If you don't mention a disease, so I guess Nir, my question to you would be, why? It's sort of like thinking about the why behind what you're doing. Why am I spending all this time doing this? Is some goal that you want to achieve. It's not curing a disease. Then I guess you want to try to take it up to. I don't. You could say it's. I think it sort of gets this question. Like you could say what we're doing. Is you could reference this other disease and say it's sort of like this without saying it is. But maybe there are learnings that. Maybe this is part of a conversation we should have, we can have offline or one-on-one, but because I want to know a little bit more about it. But a comparison is not 100%. It's never 100% perfect. So depending on the specifics of what you're saying, maybe there are ways to deal with it. I understand what you're saying. It feels insincere to say, well, it's kind of like that when you're not really. What is it actually then? If it's not exactly this other disease, and that's something that we probably have to discuss kind of offline. Any special tips? All right, theoretical research on computer science. Yeah, that was what I was trying to get at when I was talking about physics. But this was, the research kind of get back to talking about theoretical research on computer science. So we can better understand X. It's sort of a two-parter. You're thinking about why should the person care, right? And then why are you spending so much of your life doing this? What is it that is driving you, is motivating you to work on this particular problem? What is your why for doing this? And I think when you get to that, that can help. You can show, you can get, well, I'm doing it because you start to get, you're passionate about it, interested in it, and that comes across to your audience. And when your audience sees that you're excited about something, oftentimes your audience starts to get more engaged as well, because they can see how exciting, how passionate you feel about this. Let me read this one. When you're when you're pitching to unknowns, like in a grant situation. So here is just some specifics. I have thought about this one too. Is sometimes, and it doesn't work all of the time, but sometimes when you are in a grant situation, it kind of a question is, do you know who the program officer is? And in that, I just mean, do you know? Well, taking a step back, how about, do you have any colleagues who have written a successful grant kind of in the same domain, to the same agency, ideally to the same program officer, but not always known? That can be helpful to get a sense from talking to colleagues, who have, who have met with the agency, or if you have a chance to do that. If you don't, it's understandable too. And I understand what you're saying, Ofer, about it's like, it's totally, you have no idea about your audience, and that, I think the only, there it's kind of like it's a tricky situation, obviously a challenge. Maybe think about either other colleagues or other grants that you knew. Actually, one thing I would just think about off the top of my head, like if I'm submitting to NIST, and I'm submitting to a particular department or unit within there, would I be able to access excuse me, would I be able to access grants that they funded, like successful grants? Can I read proposals that were submitted, or project descriptions or something like that online? Could otherwise, and maybe by reading some of if I can read some of those, maybe I can then talk to those, talk to the authors. I'd like to reach out to you. You had this successful grant. I don't know how realistic that is in your world, because I'm not in your world to that degree. But I just wonder, as I think about some of the research potentially you could get about your audience, is number one, reading grants that have been funded by the agency you're submitting to. Maybe number two, contacting the authors, the investigators on the proposals or on the grants, and seeing if you can engage with them, if they have any tips, for writing grants to this particular unit, say, in our example, within NIST. I think those are some of the things to think about, in addition to some of the techniques that we've been talking about. So trying to do some more research by looking at other successful grants that have been, funded by this particular place where you're submitting. That's a really good question. Any other questions? All right. Well, let me. We're going to wrap it up in a minute. I want to just take one quick look. If anyone else has any other questions, please go ahead and ask. And just the last thing being, if you'd like to go deeper on this subject, if you'd like to, take it to, many more levels down and do, it's a 4-part series that I offer. It's live. It's 1 hour at a time. There's a little bit of pre-work in between, or work in between the webinars. But if you'd like to learn more about that, I'll be offering the course again in January. And like I said, it's really funded by oftentimes the Office of Postdoc Affairs at a university, Office of Research Communications, the BEST program, which some of you might be familiar with. And now that funding's over, some universities have continued to have incorporated that programming and funded that programming. within their own faculties, engineering schools, arts and sciences, wherever it happens to be. And so if you're interested in that, I'd be happy to share that with you. And perhaps you could share it with whoever within your department or your whatever the relevant unit is in university, because that's who funds my students are the university themselves, and then they decide which students they're going to send to take my class, which is how to communicate your science effectively to any audience. Just type in course or reach out to me in the Facebook group. You can tag me. I actually will put my email and you can send me an email if you'd like to learn more about the course. So I really enjoyed this back and forth. I'd love to meet you guys in person. Look forward, I hope, to other interactions. If you're interested in the course, I can send you information about that. Again, this was kind of like the sprint through science communication. There's a lot there, but I would just like to leave you kind of with this message, which is the most important thing is to start working, trying to incorporate some of the tools and techniques that we talked about. It's not going to be perfect. Nothing new, or even if communicating your science isn't terribly new, using these tools, maybe that's a newer experience for you. It's not going to be perfect, but it's really important to start, and you'll get learnings from it, and you'll kind of apply your own scientific thinking generally to this particular project, which is I'm going to experiment, I'm going to get some results, I'm going to incorporate the feedback, what I learn, I'm going to adjust, and then I'm going to try it again, and I'll do a second experiment using a different metaphor and a different structure and maybe a different order, and then I'll get some more learnings, and I'll figure out, I'll think about my audience, and I'll find some ways to learn more about my audience, either asking questions at the beginning and or doing research beforehand, and just take it on as kind of a process, and you're gonna, the more you do it though, the better you're gonna get at it, and the more you're going to enjoy doing it. And so I hope this, at least in a small way, supported those efforts, and I look forward to continuing the dialogue. And I guess overall, I want you to be successful. I want your work to get out to the broader world in a way that really makes an impact. And I know that's what you want as well. And that's why someone like me, who has no scientific background, spends all his time working with scientists. So thank you so much for your attention. Thank you for your comments. I really, really appreciate it. And have a great rest of your day. And I look forward to being in touch. Bye-bye.